They called my wedding a disgrace. My own parents. The people I once believed would walk me down the aisle, smile in the front row, maybe even cry a little. Instead, they sent me a message. We won't come. While I stood alone in white lace, they were somewhere off the coast of Catalina Island, raising champagne glasses on my sister's yacht. My mother laughed under the golden sunset, while I tried to smile under church lights. For years I told myself I was too grown to care. But in that moment, every uncelebrated birthday, every ignored award, every time they said Lily's name instead of mine, all came rushing back. I thought it would break me forever. But life has a funny way of flipping the script. Because while they toasted my humiliation, the cameras were already rolling live across the nation. The church in La Jolla smelled faintly of salt and lilies, the ocean air sneaking in through the open windows. The pews gleamed under the afternoon light, every detail, perfect, the ribbons, the candles, the pale roses I'd chosen myself. Yet all I could see was the row of empty seats in the front. The ones marked with gold calligraphy, reserved for the Henderson family. No one sat there, no father to offer a steady arm, no mother adjusting my veil, no sister waving proudly. Only the absence of them, sharp as a blade, glinting against the beauty of the day. I gripped the bouquet tighter, feeling the stems press into my palms. The weight of silence filled the chapel. My heels clicked softly against the marble as I took my first step down the aisle. Each sound echoed too loudly, reminding me that the only family I had here were friends who had stepped in out of kindness. Somewhere deep inside, I still expected my mother's perfume to drift through the doorway, or my father's voice to thunder. Wait for me. But nothing came. Just the hum of the organ and the ache in my chest. A few hours earlier, I had checked my phone expecting a change of heart. Instead, I'd seen the text, 8 cold words that gutted me. We won't come. This wedding is a disgrace. Beneath it, my sister Lily had posted a picture of them on a yacht, crystal glasses, raised high, her caption, reading celebrating life's true milestones. Their smiles were flawless, their skin glowing under the sun, and for the first time in my life, I understood just how small they wanted me to feel. They hadn't merely declined, they'd celebrated my exclusion. My humiliation was their entertainment. I had stared at the screen until the letters blurred, my hands trembling. My best friend Maya had seen the look on my face and snatched the phone gently away. Forget them, she'd said, her voice fierce. They don't deserve to watch you walk. I had nodded, even smiled, pretending to agree. But the truth was, I wanted nothing more than for them to see me, to witness this moment, and finally, after 33 years, to be proud. As the organ swelled and the guests rose to their feet, I took a deep breath and lifted my chin. My gown rustled softly as I moved forward, the silk brushing against my legs. The light from the stained glass windows painted streaks of blue and crimson across the aisle. To anyone else, it might have looked heavenly. To me, it felt like walking through the ruins of an old dream. Richard and Elaine Henderson had built their lives around appearances. My father had been a lawyer for 40 years, the kind of man who measured worth by headlines and handshakes. My mother, a figure in every San Diego charity gala, believed reputation was a woman's greatest armor. Together, they had perfected the art of looking flawless. And Lily, my little sister, the prodigy pianist, the golden daughter, was their masterpiece. From the moment she touched her first piano key, their world began to orbit around her. I was the background noise, the practical one, the responsible child. Invisible except when needed for applause. My father once said at a dinner party, Lily was born to shine. Clara just prefers staying in the shadows. I had smiled politely while my insides twisted. What he didn't understand was that I didn't prefer the shadows. They were simply all that was left for me. As I walked, I thought of those years of birthdays, spent alone, of dinners where conversation revolved around Lily's latest performance, of the quiet resentment that had built inside me like sediment. I had spent my 20s building something of my own, a landscape architecture firm that turned barren lots into green sanctuaries. My work had been featured in magazines, my designs awarded by the city. But when I told my parents about my first major project, my father only said, "Well, it's not exactly Carnegie Hall, is it?" My mother had smiled absently and asked if I'd seen Lily's latest interview. That was the last time I tried to impress them. Now, standing in the glow of the altar, I felt all those years pressing down on me, the endless striving, the quiet ache of never being enough. My throat tightened, but I refused to let the tears fall. Not today. Today I would stand tall even if no one clapped for me. Ethan waited at the end of the aisle, his posture calm, his eyes steady on mine. There was something in his expression, reassurance, maybe even pride, that anchored me. He looked at me as though nothing in the world could diminish this moment. For a heartbeat, I wondered if he knew. If he had seen the photos, if he understood the depth of the betrayal. But when I reached him, he simply took my hand, his fingers warm and sure. "Do you still want this?" I whispered, my voice barely audible beneath the music. He smiled, a slow, unshakable smile that reached his eyes. "More than ever," he said. The officiant began to speak, his voice echoing through the high ceilings. Words about love, endurance, and trust, words that felt fragile against the weight of what I had lost. My friends sat in the front pews, their faces soft with sympathy. I tried to focus on them, on the kindness in their eyes, but my gaze kept flickering to the empty seats beyond. Those polished wood surfaces gleamed under the light like silent witnesses to my abandonment. Somewhere outside, a gull cried, its voice cutting through the stillness. I drew a slow breath and held it, reminding myself that I wasn't broken. Not yet. The air was thick with incense, with the faint hum of the organ and the rhythmic thud of my own heart. I clung to Ethan's hand like an anchor. His thumb brushed against my knuckles in small grounding circles. It was enough to keep me standing. Then, out of the corner of my eye, I saw movement. A group of people slipped quietly through the back doors, 3 men and 2 women each, carrying cameras and equipment. One adjusted a tripod, another whispered into a headset. My stomach tightened. The red light on one of the cameras blinked to life. My pulse quickened. I turned slightly toward Ethan, confusion stirring in my chest. "What's going on?" I murmured. He didn't look away from me. His smile remained soft, calm. "You'll see," he said quietly. The officiant's voice continued, unaware of the new presence. The guests shifted in their seats, some curious, others too polite to stare. I glanced again at the camera, the lens pointed directly at us, capturing every detail. The ivory of my gown, the tremor in my hands, the faint flicker of surprise that I couldn't quite hide. "Ethan," I whispered again, "why are they here?" He squeezed my hand, eyes locked on mine. "Because you deserve to be seen." The words hung between us, puzzling and powerful. Before I could ask more, the camera light blinked again, brighter this time. Somewhere far beyond this church, televisions were turning on. A live broadcast was beginning. The officiant asked us to recite our vows. My voice shook at first, but I found my rhythm, my courage woven between each word. I spoke of love, of patience, of building something together. And though my hands trembled, I didn't falter. The lens captured it all, the pain, the strength, the silent defiance. In that moment, surrounded by the beauty of the chapel and the ghosts of those who refused to come, I realized something. My parents could miss this. They could choose silence. They could toast my absence from a yacht. But they couldn't erase what the world was about to see. Because as Ethan slipped the ring onto my finger, the camera zoomed in, broadcasting our vows live on national television. Somewhere on that yacht, I imagined my mother's glass slipping from her hand, the shimmer of champagne falling into the sea. My father's face tightening, my sister's perfect smile faltering. I could almost hear it, the sound of their pride cracking. I didn't know it then, but that was the moment everything began to turn. And as I stood beneath the vaulted ceiling, bathed in golden light, a quiet thought passed through me: the world might finally see me, even if my family never would. The call came on a quiet Thursday evening, just as the sun dipped behind the San Diego hills, painting the windows of Clara's apartment in muted gold. She was sketching the outline of a coastal resort proposal when her phone lit up. The name on the screen froze her breath. Elaine Henderson. Her mother hadn't called since that final argument months ago, the one that ended with the words, "You're embarrassing this family." For a heartbeat, Clara considered letting it ring out. But curiosity, that cruel and familiar pull, made her swipe the screen. Clara Elaine began, her tone clipped and deliberate, as though rehearsed. "We've discussed it, and your father and I won't be attending the wedding." The words landed like glass shattering. Clara blinked, pen still in hand, unable to process what she'd just heard. "You're not coming?" she asked softly, disbelief tightening her chest. "Mom, it's my wedding." Elaine exhaled, the sound strained but resolute. "Your father feels it wouldn't reflect well on us. Marrying a man you barely know from a background we don't approve of, it's a mistake." "People talk, Clara. You don't understand how reputation works in this world." Something inside her snapped. "I understand more than you think," she said quietly. "I just don't worship it." There was silence, thick, suffocating, before Elaine spoke again, colder now. "You've always been dramatic. This is why your father and I worry. We tried to raise you better than this. You're marrying beneath you, and we can't attach our name to it." Attach our name. The phrase dug under her skin. They didn't see her love, her work, her years of struggle. They saw a label, a reflection of themselves. "Is this about Ethan or about control?" she asked, her voice trembling now. "Don't be childish," Elaine snapped. "You've chosen this path. We'll let you walk it alone." The line went dead. For a long moment, Clara sat motionless, staring at the pattern of sunlight fading across the floor. Alone. The word echoed louder than her mother's voice. Later that night, she called her sister, hoping foolishly for understanding. Lily answered on the second ring, her voice bright and effortless. "Hey, superstar architect. Big day coming up, huh?" Clara forced a small laugh. "Yeah, I guess. I wanted to talk about Mom and Dad." "Oh, I already know," Lily interrupted, her tone casual. "They're not coming. Honestly, I don't blame them." Clara froze. "You what?" Lily sighed. "Come on, Clara. You're rushing this. Marrying someone they've never met, with no family blessing in some tiny chapel. It's not exactly the kind of thing people expect from a Henderson." There it was again. The family name, always heavier than love, heavier than truth. "So my happiness is less important than what people think." "Don't twist it," Lily said. "It's about standards. You know how Dad is. He built everything we have from nothing. You can't just throw that away because of feelings." Clara's hands tightened around the phone. "You sound just like them." "Well," Lily replied coolly, "maybe that's why I've never been the disappointment." The words hit like a slap. Clara inhaled sharply, the room spinning for a second. She wanted to scream, to tell Lily how cruel she sounded, how shallow. Instead, she hung up before her voice could break. The apartment was quiet except for the faint hum of the refrigerator. She sank into the couch, pulling her knees to her chest. For a moment, she wished she could be a child again, before expectations became walls, before love came with terms, and image became a prison. Ethan found her there an hour later, the lights off, her phone face down on the coffee table. "What happened?" he asked, gently crouching beside her. She shook her head, voice hollow. "They're not coming, none of them. Apparently I'm a disgrace." He didn't speak at first, just reached for her hand, tracing small circles over her skin. "You're not a disgrace," he said finally. "You're their mirror, and they don't like what they see." Clara looked up at him, her throat tight. "I wanted them there, Ethan. I wanted to believe they could change." "People don't change when the truth makes them uncomfortable," he said softly. "They change when silence costs them too much to bear." His words settled deep inside her, quiet but sharp. She leaned into him, letting his calm steady her heartbeat. "Then, maybe," she whispered, "this silence will be my gift to them." Over the next week, Clara moved through the wedding preparations with mechanical precision. She adjusted the seating chart, 3 empty chairs where her parents and sister were meant to sit. She emailed the florist, reminding them to add white calla lilies, her grandmother's favorite. When the bridal boutique asked if her mother would be attending the final fitting, Clara simply smiled and said she won't be able to make it. At night, though, the cracks showed. Lying in bed, she replayed her father's silence, her mother's dismissal, Lily's smug tone. Every rejection replayed like a song she couldn't turn off. But each morning she rose dressed and kept going. Maya, her maid of honor, noticed the shift. "You're too calm," she said one afternoon, as they reviewed the final vendor list. "That's not a good sign." Clara smiled faintly. "I'm just saving the crying for later." Maya frowned. "You don't have to be strong all the time." Clara's gaze drifted to the window to the city skyline she'd helped design. "I'm not being strong," she said softly. "I'm just refusing to break where they expect me to." 3 nights before the wedding, she received another message. Not a call this time, just a text from her father. "We've made our decision. Don't embarrass yourself further. We wish you well, but you're on your own." Clara stared at the screen for a long while, her reflection faint in the glass. The words should have hurt, but instead they felt final. Like a verdict she had already accepted. She typed out 3 words, paused, then deleted them. She didn't owe them an explanation. Not anymore. The next morning, she took a long drive down the coast alone. The Pacific stretched endlessly beside her, waves crashing like applause she didn't feel she deserved. She stopped at a small overlook, the wind tugging her hair loose, and whispered, to no one in particular, "I'll still walk down that aisle." The vow wasn't just for Ethan anymore. It was for the girl she used to be, the one who sat in the corner during Lily's birthday parties, the one who studied under dim light while her parents traveled for piano recitals. That girl had waited a lifetime for permission to belong. Now she didn't need permission. When she returned home, Ethan was waiting with dinner takeout sushi, her favorite. He smiled, lifting his glass. "To new beginnings." She clinked his glass softly, managing a small smile. "To walking alone when we have to." That night she stood by the window watching the city lights flicker like fireflies. Her parents' words still echoed in her mind, but for the first time they didn't hollow her out. They hardened her resolve. She imagined the chapel, the soft music, the rows of flowers. The empty seats in the front row no longer symbolized rejection. They were a declaration, a reminder that she'd built this life without their applause. As she turned from the window, her phone buzzed again. A message from Maya. "Everything's set. You'll look stunning, even if half the city doesn't deserve to see it." Clara smiled, typing back, "They'll see it anyway." She put her phone down, her reflection framed by the darkened glass. For a long moment she studied herself, not the daughter they dismissed, not the shadow they ignored, but the woman she had become. Strong, unapologetic, ready. Outside the night deepened. The world around her slept, but Clara lay awake, her thoughts sharp and steady. The ache was still there, yes, but it no longer ruled her. Tomorrow she would send out the final seating plan, confirm the catering, and pick up her gown. And when the day came, she would walk that aisle, no matter how many chairs stood empty. Because sometimes the most powerful thing you can do is show up when no one expects you to. The morning of the wedding dawned calm and golden, the kind of sunlight that makes even silence look forgiving. Clara woke early, long before the makeup artist was scheduled to arrive. She stood by the window watching the soft light spill across the San Diego harbor, the water catching every hue of dawn. The city looked peaceful, unaware that her heart wasn't. She pressed a hand to her chest and whispered to herself, "This is still my day." Downstairs, the small team of florists moved quietly through the venue, filling the chapel with the scent of white lilies and pale roses. The soft hum of preparation felt almost sacred. Clara arrived at the chapel just after 8, her gown draped carefully across her arm, her heels clicking on the marble floor. The space was breathtaking, rows of white chairs lined in symmetry, candles flickering beneath the stained glass windows. It was everything she had imagined as a girl, except for one thing, the absence that filled the air. When she reached the altar, she stopped. The seats marked reserved Henderson family were empty, untouched, their small name cards resting stiffly against the white linen. For a moment, her throat tightened. She could picture her mother sitting there, her father stiff in his suit, Lily adjusting her perfect curls. She could almost hear their polite applause. But they weren't there. They had chosen to turn their backs on her, and this, the quiet, was their signature. Maya entered behind her carrying a bouquet of lilies wrapped in ivory silk. "You look like you're about to pass out," she teased softly. "I might," Clara said with a weak laugh. "It's surreal." Maya's gaze followed hers to the empty seats. She hesitated. "Do you want to move those signs? Maybe it'll hurt less if no." Clara interrupted gently. "They stay. Let them be reminders." Maya nodded understanding. "Then let's make the rest of the room forget they were ever supposed to be here." The hair and makeup team arrived soon after, bustling around Clara with practiced precision. Powder brushed across her cheeks, pins slid into her dark hair, the veil fastened just so. Through it all, she remained silent, her thoughts drifting like the morning light. When the stylist stepped back and handed her the mirror, Clara hardly recognized the reflection. The woman looking back at her wasn't the girl who used to cry behind closed doors or beg for her father's approval. This woman looked calm, sculpted, ready. "Perfect," the stylist murmured. Clara smiled faintly. "No," she said. "Just enough." By noon, the guests began arriving. Friends from her firm, a few college classmates, neighbors who had seen her fight her way through long nights at the drafting board. They filled the space with warmth and chatter, their laughter echoing softly through the chapel. Each greeting, each hug chipped away at her loneliness. When she peeked out from behind the curtain, she saw Ethan standing near the altar, speaking with the officiant. He looked elegant, his dark suit pressed perfectly, his tie, the same shade of navy as the sea. But it wasn't his wealth or the calm authority in his posture that struck her, it was the way he waited. Patient, unwavering. The steadiness of a man who had chosen her not for who she might become, but for who she already was. At precisely 2 o'clock, the organist began to play. The melody filled the chapel like a tide rising against the shore. Maya took her hand. "Ready?" Clara exhaled slowly. "Yes." The doors opened. A hush rippled through the crowd. She stepped forward. Each click of her heel against the marble echoed through the vaulted space, sharp and haunting. The air smelled of roses and candle wax. She kept her chin high, though her eyes stung. For a fleeting second, she imagined her mother watching from the shadows, her father adjusting his tie, her sister smirking in quiet superiority. But the vision dissolved like smoke, replaced by the truth they weren't there. And she was still standing. Halfway down the aisle, a single tear escaped. She let it. It wasn't weakness, it was release. When she reached Ethan, he took her hand, his thumb brushing over her knuckles, grounding her in the moment. "You're breathtaking," he whispered. "Thank you," she breathed, her voice trembling just enough to betray her heart. The officiant began to speak, his voice deep, and steady words of unity and promise filling the air. Clara's eyes flicked once more to the front row, still empty. And yet the silence didn't crush her this time. It framed her. As the ceremony unfolded, Clara's mind drifted briefly to the night before, to the last-minute text she'd sent her mother. "I'll be walking down the aisle tomorrow. Whether or not you come, I hope you'll remember what you're missing." No reply had come. Not a word, not even a punctuation mark. The officiant's voice drew her back. "Clara, do you take Ethan Caldwell to be your lawfully wedded husband?" Her lips curved into a soft, defiant smile. "I do." When Ethan slipped the ring onto her finger, the world stilled. The small group of guests applauded, the sound gentle but heartfelt. Maya was crying quietly in the front row, dabbing at her mascara with a tissue. The photographer moved around them, capturing the moment, the grace, the silence, the strength. Then something strange happened. As the applause died down, the heavy chapel doors opened again. Clara turned startled, but instead of familiar faces, she saw 3 camera operators walking briskly inside. Behind them followed a young woman with a headset and a press badge clipped to her blazer. Maya frowned. "What the hell?" The woman whispered something to her crew. Red recording lights flicked on. The cameraman aimed directly at the altar. Clara's pulse spiked. She turned to Ethan, confusion flashing in her eyes. "What's going on?" He squeezed her hand lightly. "You'll see." The officiant paused mid-sentence, unsure how to proceed. The guests exchanged murmurs. The cameras adjusted angles, one focusing on Clara's face, another on Ethan's hand resting over hers. "Ethan," she whispered urgently, "why are they here?" He looked at her, calm as ever. "Because you deserve to be seen, Clara. Not hidden, not erased." The realization hit her slowly, like dawn breaking. He had done this. He had invited them. Her heart raced, not from panic now, but from something far larger, a dawning comprehension of what this meant. All her life she had been told to stay quiet, to stay small, to avoid embarrassment. And here she was, her wedding broadcast for the world to witness. The officiant cleared his throat, resuming the ceremony. The cameras moved closer. Flashbulbs flickered. Clara's veil glowed beneath the sudden brightness, her skin lit in soft gold. She could almost hear her parents' voices in her mind. A disgrace. But as she looked into Ethan's eyes, she realized something extraordinary. This wasn't disgrace. This was reclamation. The vows continued. Her voice trembled at first, but grew stronger with each word. "I vow to walk beside you," she said, "through storms and silence, through loss and triumph. I vow to never let fear write my story again." Ethan's gaze softened. When he spoke his vows, the entire room seemed to breathe with him. "I vow to protect your peace," he said, "simply, even from the ghosts of your past." When the officiant finally declared them husband and wife, applause erupted. The sound was fuller this time, echoing off the walls like thunder. Clara turned slightly, her veil lifting as the camera zoomed in. She smiled, not for the audience, not for her absent family, but for herself. Outside, a small crowd had gathered, drawn by curiosity as word spread about the mystery wedding with the billionaire groom. By the time Clara and Ethan stepped out into the sunlight, reporters were already clustered near the gates. Flashing lights burst around them, microphones rose like spears. "Mrs. Caldwell, how does it feel?" one called. Clara met the camera's lens head on, her expression calm, her voice steady. "It feels like freedom." That night, as they returned to their apartment, the city felt different, charged alive. Clara's phone buzzed, incessantly missed calls, social media tags, trending headlines. She didn't open any of them. Not yet. She sat on the couch in her wedding gown, the lace pooled around her feet. Ethan handed her a glass of champagne. "Are you angry with me?" he asked quietly. She shook her head. "No, just overwhelmed." He sat beside her, his tone gentle. "I wanted the world to see what they refused to. That's all." Clara smiled faintly, lifting the glass, then let them watch. Outside, the harbor shimmered beneath the moonlight. Inside, her phone continued to buzz, 100 voices clamoring for her attention. Somewhere among them, one name would stand out before the night was over. But for now, she didn't look. She took another sip, leaned against Ethan's shoulder, and whispered, "I think this was the beginning of something they'll never forget." And for the first time in her life, the silence that followed felt like victory. The following morning, the world already knew her name. Clara woke to the sound of her phone buzzing relentlessly on the nightstand. The glow of the screen cut through the dim light of dawn. Messages, emails, alerts, hundreds of them. Her stomach twisted as she scrolled through the notifications. News headlines filled the screen. Billionaire CEO marries unknown architect in private ceremony broadcast live. Mystery bride of Ethan Caldwell captivates America. There were clips of her walking down the aisle, her voice trembling as she spoke. Her vows the moment Ethan lifted her veil. Every second of what had been sacred was now public. Ethan emerged from the kitchen holding 2 mugs of coffee. "It's all over the news," he said, handing one to her. "You're trending." "I didn't think it would be this big," Clara whispered, scrolling through the footage of herself on national television. It was surreal. The camera angles, the captions, the commentary from strangers speculating about her life. Some praised her elegance, others questioned her past. Who was she before him, they asked. Ethan sat beside her, calm, almost amused. People love a story, he said simply, especially when it surprises them. Clara looked up at him, her brow furrowing. You knew this would happen. He didn't deny it. I did, he admitted. And I wanted it to, because for once they couldn't ignore you. She set the phone down, her pulse unsteady. You mean my parents? Ethan nodded slightly. They needed to see what they threw away. Clara stared at the coffee in her hands, the steam swirling in the quiet space. Part of her wanted to be angry that he'd exposed something so intimate. But beneath that, she felt something else: vindication. The same family who had deemed her a disgrace were now watching her become headline news. By noon, the messages began pouring in. Friends from college congratulated her coworkers, sent screenshots of the news coverage. Even distant relatives she hadn't heard from in years wrote things like, "So proud of you." But one message stood out, the one she hadn't expected to see. It came through the old family group chat she hadn't opened in months. The preview on her screen read only 4 words. "Where are you, Clara?" Her hand froze. She opened the chat. There they were, dozens of unread messages lighting up all at once. Her mother, her father, even Lily. From her father, "Why didn't you tell us who he really was?" From her mother, "How could you let us find out on TV? People are calling, we're being bombarded with questions." From Lily, "Wow, guess I underestimated you." Clara stared at the words, her lips parting in disbelief. Of all the things they could have said, no congratulations, no apology, just panic. Panic that their pride had been bruised. Ethan watched her expression darken. "Let me guess," he said softly. "They want back in." Clara nodded slowly. "They don't even realize what this means to them. Not me, just them." Her phone buzzed again. Her father's latest message appeared. "You owe us an explanation." She exhaled through her nose, her fingers trembling slightly. Then she typed nothing. Instead, she scrolled up, found the message that started it all, the one where they told her they wouldn't attend, and pressed her thumb gently over it. The words still stung. This wedding is a disgrace. And now they were the ones begging for a response. Ethan leaned over, his voice low. "You don't have to answer." "I know," Clara said, "but I will." She tapped the screen once, hovering over the message. Then, with a faint smirk, she selected a single emoji, a small yellow face laughing. She hit send. For a moment, the sound of the sent message was the only noise in the room. Then she set her phone aside, picked up her coffee, and took a slow sip. "That's it?" Ethan asked, smiling slightly. "That's all they get," she replied. "I spent years explaining myself to people who never listened. Now they can interpret silence." Within minutes, her phone lit up again, her mother calling, her father texting, the chat flooding with unanswered questions. Clara ignored it all. The sound of notifications became background noise, meaningless and distant. Ethan wrapped an arm around her shoulders, his voice gentle. "You did the right thing." She looked up at him, her eyes steady. "No," she said. "I did the final thing." Later that afternoon, the news cycle intensified. A clip from the ceremony was replayed on every network, complete with commentary about Ethan Caldwell's mysterious bride. Analysts speculated about her background, her career, her humble upbringing. Someone had even dug up her university thesis, showcasing her architectural work on sustainable communities. Ironically, the same traits that her family had dismissed as insignificant were now being celebrated on a national stage. By evening, the apartment felt quieter. Ethan had gone to take a business call, and Clara sat alone on the couch, scrolling through the comments under a news post. "She's stunning. She must be brilliant if he married her. Her parents must be so proud." She almost laughed at that last one. Proud. The word had become a ghost she'd stopped chasing years ago. Her phone buzzed again, this time a video call. Her mother. Clara hesitated, thumb hovering over the accept button. Then she pressed it. Elaine's face appeared perfectly framed as though she had rehearsed even this. But her eyes looked unsettled, red around the edges. "Clara," she breathed. "What were you thinking? Why didn't you tell us we could have?" "You could have what?" Clara interrupted, her voice calm but sharp. "Shown up for the cameras. You made your choice, Mom. You said it would embarrass the family." Elaine flinched. "We didn't mean it like that. We just didn't know who he really was." "That's the problem," Clara said softly. "You never asked." Her mother's lips trembled. "Your father, he's devastated. People are calling him a fool. We just—" Clara cut her off again, her tone firm. "This isn't about you anymore. It never should have been." Elaine's voice cracked. "You don't understand how much this hurts." Clara's eyes narrowed slightly. "I do. I lived it." She ended the call before her mother could reply. For a long while she sat in silence, the faint hum of the city filtering through the window. The ache in her chest wasn't rage anymore, it was release. Years of seeking approval, of shrinking herself to fit their image, had finally burned away. When Ethan returned, she was still sitting there, her phone face down on the coffee table. "They called," he guessed. "Yes," she said simply. "And for the first time, I didn't answer for them. I answered for me." He smiled, pride shining in his eyes. "So what now, Mrs. Caldwell?" Clara turned toward him, her expression soft but resolute. "Now I build something they can't take credit for." The evening deepened, and for the first time in months she felt no weight pressing against her chest. The world might still talk about her, dissect her choices, label her as the architect who married a billionaire. But those voices didn't matter. Somewhere on a yacht or behind closed doors, her parents were probably still fuming, her sister, scrolling through endless headlines, drowning in envy and confusion. And yet Clara felt nothing but calm. She poured herself another glass of wine and stood by the window, the city glittering below. The reflection in the glass caught her eye. A woman in a white dress, her posture strong, her eyes steady. She raised her glass slightly, a quiet toast to herself. "To the girl they called a disgrace," she whispered. "And the woman who proved them wrong." The phone buzzed again on the table. She didn't look back. Instead, she turned toward Ethan and said with a smile that was both weary and free, "Let's watch the sunset. The world can wait." Outside, the last streaks of light slipped beyond the horizon. Inside, Clara exhaled for what felt like the first time in years. She didn't need to fight anymore. The war was already won. The morning light filtered through the curtains, soft and golden, spilling across the apartment like a quiet blessing. Clara stirred awake to the faint murmur of the television in the living room. She reached for her phone, first habit, reflex, survival. The screen exploded with notifications. Every headline bore her name. From Disgrace to Darling, the Henderson daughter who married a billionaire. America's new obsession, the bride who walked alone. Who is Clara Caldwell? Her pulse quickened. She scrolled, reading snippets from interviews. She hadn't given opinion pieces, dissecting her every gesture at the altar, her expression, her tears. Strangers online debated whether she had planned the humble to Hollywood transformation. Others called her the face of quiet revenge. She tossed the phone aside and walked barefoot to the living room. Ethan sat on the couch, coffee in hand, watching a morning show replaying clips from their wedding. The host's voice was bright and cheerful. "She's the architect who stole America's heart," the host said, "and the daughter whose parents missed the biggest day of her life." Tragic or poetic? Ethan muted the sound when she entered. "They're obsessed," he said lightly. Clara gave a small, humorless smile. "They always love a redemption arc." On screen, her own face appeared, eyes shining beneath her veil, lips trembling as she said, "I do." It felt strange watching herself from the outside. She looked composed, radiant even, but she remembered the shaking beneath her ribs, the weight of every step down that aisle. Ethan stood and crossed the room, placing a gentle hand on her shoulder. "You okay?" She nodded, though her throat felt tight. "Just surreal." But then her phone buzzed again, this time the family group chat she had muted weeks ago. The message preview flashed. "Where are you? We need to talk." her heart stopped. She unlocked the screen. There it was, her father's message, cold and urgent. Beneath it, her mother's. "Why didn't you tell us who he was?" And Lily's simple but barbed guess, "You finally did something worth watching." Clara stared at the words until they blurred. Then she laughed, a sharp, exhausted sound. "They don't even pretend to care," she said softly. Ethan watched her face. "They're embarrassed. They'll twist this into your fault, too." Clara's phone buzzed again. "Call us back. We can fix this." Fix this? She shook her head in disbelief. They hadn't come to her wedding, hadn't sent a single blessing, and now they wanted to fix their image. Ethan took the phone gently from her hands and set it down. "You don't owe them anything." But something inside her burned a mixture of anger and clarity. "No," she said quietly. "I don't owe them, but I want them to know I see them for what they are." She picked the phone back up, scrolled through the messages again, and typed nothing. Instead, she opened the emoji tab, found the one she wanted, the laughing face, and hit send. For a moment, she felt a surge of adrenaline. Then stillness. Ethan arched a brow. "That's it," Clara smiled, faintly leaning back on the couch. "That's all the explanation they deserve." Her phone buzzed again seconds later, calls, messages, panic. She ignored them all, muting the thread entirely. "They're probably on that yacht right now, trying to figure out how to spin this," she said dryly. Ethan chuckled. "Let them drown in their own PR." The phone kept vibrating on the table. Clara let it. She poured herself coffee, took a slow sip, and exhaled. The warmth settled deep in her chest, steady and grounding. By afternoon, the media frenzy had reached its peak. News segments replayed her story endlessly, juxtaposing it against images of her father, the once respected attorney, and her sister, the darling pianist. Sources confirm estranged relationship, parents absent from ceremony, a tale of family betrayal and poetic justice. When the anchor mentioned her father's name, the camera cut to an old photo of him in a tuxedo, smiling stiffly beside Elaine. For the first time, Clara didn't feel small looking at that image. She felt distance, power. At lunchtime, Maya called. "Girl, you broke the internet," she said, her voice somewhere between awe and laughter. "Your wedding has 30 million views. I can't tell if people love you or just love watching your parents squirm." Clara laughed softly. "Maybe both." Maya's tone softened. "You okay?" "Really, I'm fine," Clara said, meaning it this time. "It's strange. I thought I'd feel guilty." "I don't." "You shouldn't," Maya said firmly. "They did this to themselves." As they talked, Ethan scrolled through another wave of articles, half grinning. "Oh, here's my favorite headline," he said, reading aloud. "When Karma Wears White." Clara snorted. "Catchy." He set the phone down, serious again. "I know this isn't the wedding day you imagined, but I want you to know it's the one the world needed to see." She looked at him, really looked at him. "You turned my pain into something visible." "I just gave the truth a stage," he said simply. That night, the apartment felt too quiet. The city lights flickered through the windows, reflecting off the glass of unfinished champagne from the night before. Clara sat, curled on the couch, scrolling aimlessly through the online storm she had become. For every message of admiration, there were cruel ones too. She married for money. She planned the whole thing. No wonder her parents stayed away. She read them all. Then she closed her phone and set it face down. The sound of rain began tapping against the windows. Ethan joined her, pulling her close. "They'll forget by next week," he said. "I don't want them to forget," she murmured. "I want them to remember who they left behind." He tilted her chin up, his voice low. "Then you've already won." The next morning, she woke to a new flood of coverage. But this time, the headlines were different. "The Bride Who Stood Alone." "Strength in Silence, How One Woman Redefined Grace." The tone had shifted from spectacle to admiration. There was even a clip of a talk show panel discussing her story. A journalist said, "There's something universal about her courage. It's not just about revenge, it's about dignity." Clara smiled faintly as she watched tears prickling her eyes. Dignity. That was the word she'd been searching for all her life. At that same moment, miles away on that familiar yacht, her parents were facing the kind of spotlight they had always feared. Elaine's phone rang non-stop. Reporters demanded comments, friends texted condolences, thinly veiled as gossip. Richard, humiliated, smashed his phone on the deck when a headline read Henderson family snubs daughter's billionaire wedding. Their perfect image was unraveling strand by strand. Meanwhile, Lily sat in her cabin scrolling through the same footage. Everyone else was watching her sister's vows, her poise, the roar of applause. For the first time in her life, Lily felt invisible. Back in the apartment, Clara's phone buzzed again. Another message from her father. "You've made us a laughingstock. Do you have any idea what you've done?" Clara stared at the text for a long time, then let out a quiet, breathy laugh. "Yeah," she whispered to herself. "I finally told the truth." She deleted the message and tossed the phone onto the couch. Ethan watched her admiration flickering behind his calm smile. "What now?" he asked. Clara walked to the window, watching the city pulse beneath the morning light. "Now," she said, "I stop proving and start living." Her reflection stared back at her in the glass, steady, unapologetic. For years she had begged her family to see her. Now the entire world did. She turned her smile quiet but triumphant. "The sweetest revenge isn't shouting," she said softly. "It's letting your peace make the loudest noise." Outside, the rain had stopped. The clouds broke apart and the sun returned, washing the city in gold once more. It was the same light as the morning of her wedding, but this time it belonged to her. The apartment was quiet again. The storm had passed, at least on the surface. Clara sat by the window that afternoon, legs folded under her, a cup of untouched tea cooling beside her. The world outside seemed to move on, cars honking faintly below the steady rhythm of a normal day returning. But inside her chest there was still that hollow echo. Ethan was on a conference call in the next room. His voice carried confidence, calm authority, the tone of a man who was in control. Clara envied that steadiness. For her, control had always been an illusion. Her phone lay face down on the table, silent now after the chaos of the past week. No more calls from her parents. No new headlines about the billionaire's bride. The noise had faded, leaving only the aftertaste of everything she'd survived. She picked up the tea, took a sip, then set it down again. The bouquet from the wedding, now wilted, sat in a vase near the corner. The petals curled inward like a memory collapsing on itself. She reached out and touched one, her fingertips brushing the dryness. It fell soundlessly to the floor. That simple motion pulled something inside her open. For the first time in days, she allowed herself to remember, not the wedding, not the fame, but the little girl she had once been, the one who had longed for the same parents who now feared her success. She closed her eyes. It started with a birthday. She must have been 10. The memory came in fragments, the sound of laughter downstairs, the scent of chocolate frosting, her sister's high-pitched giggle echoing through the hall. The Henderson house had been filled with music that day. Lily's 6th birthday. Clara had spent the morning drawing a picture for her, a watercolor of the two of them on the piano bench, their hands touching the same keys. She had wrapped it in pink paper, tied it with yarn. She'd waited at the top of the stairs, clutching it tight. When she went down, the living room sparkled streamers, guests, a giant cake shaped like a grand piano. Her mother glided through the room in pearls, her father in his best suit. Everyone smiled. Everyone but her. She tried to hand the gift to her sister, but Elaine's hand stopped her. "Not now, sweetie," her mother whispered. "Let's not steal Lily's moment." Clara remembered nodding, stepping back into the shadow of the staircase, gift still in hand. Hours later, when the guests had gone and the house quieted, she crept to her room and placed the gift on her desk. Then she lit the single candle from the kitchen drawer and whispered, "Happy birthday, me," before blowing it out. The memory faded as quickly as it came, but the ache it left was sharp. That night had been her first lesson in invisibility. Clara blinked hard, forcing herself to breathe. The room around her blurred slightly, the edges softening. Another memory surfaced, her college graduation. She had been 22, proud, standing in her cap and gown, scanning the crowd for familiar faces. There were cheers all around, parents waving flowers, families holding up cameras, but no one for her. Her parents were in Chicago with Lily for a concert. They had sent a card that read, "Congratulations on your little award." Little award. She had placed it in a drawer and never opened it again. That night she had celebrated alone, with a cheap bottle of sparkling cider, sitting by the dorm window and telling herself that maybe success was its own company. She had believed it then. She didn't anymore. Her father's voice from those years echoed in her head. A Henderson must always look the part. A cheap life is a shameful one. He'd said it after she bought a used car with her own savings. She'd thought he'd be proud of her independence. Instead, he'd said, "You make us look small." Now, watching the sunlight stretch across the living room floor, she finally understood. He hadn't been protecting their reputation. He had been protecting his own insecurity. She whispered it aloud, testing the words. He was ashamed of himself. Ethan's voice drifted in from the other room, steady and warm. She could hear him laughing with someone on the call. That sound grounded her. It reminded her that not every man in her life demanded to be right. Some simply chose to be kind. When his call ended, he appeared in the doorway. "You've been quiet all morning," he said gently. "Wanna go out? We could get lunch by the marina." Clara smiled faintly. "Maybe later. I'm remembering things." He crossed the room, crouched beside her chair, and took her hand. "The bad things, the true things," she said softly. "Sometimes they're both." He nodded, saying nothing more, and kissed her knuckles before heading toward the kitchen. His quiet presence gave her space to keep remembering. She thought about her mother Elaine, elegant, polite, always composed. She used to believe her mother's silence was cruelty. But now, older and wiser, she wondered if it was fear. Fear of losing the fragile perfection she had built around herself. Fear of love that wasn't polished or safe. Clara rose from the chair, walked to her bookshelf, and pulled down an old photo album she hadn't opened in years. The pages crackled softly. There were pictures of piano recitals, gayless family portraits, where everyone smiled except her. She stopped at one, her father's arm wrapped around Lily's shoulder. Her mother's standing behind them, Clara, off to the side, half cut from the frame. She stared at that picture for a long time before whispering, "You can't crop me out anymore." Her phone buzzed on the table. A message from Maya. "How's your piece today?" Clara typed back, getting clearer. That evening she took a long walk by the harbor. The air was crisp, tinged with salt. She watched the waves roll in, each one dissolving neatly into the next. For years she had tried to hold back the tide, to be calm, acceptable, small. Now she let the sea wash over her, even if only in metaphor. When she returned home, Ethan was reading on the couch. She joined him, curling up beside him. After a moment she said, "Do you think people like my parents ever change?" He looked thoughtful sometimes. "But usually people don't change until it costs them too much to stay the same." She nodded. "Then maybe they'll change someday, or maybe they won't. Either way, I'll still be okay." He brushed her hair away from her face. "You already are." Later, when he had gone to bed, Clara sat alone with her journal open. She wrote slowly, her handwriting. Calm, deliberate. "Forgiveness doesn't mean they win. It means I stop carrying them." She closed the book and looked around the apartment, the space she had built herself, the light she had chosen, the peace she had earned. Her parents had built their legacy out of fear. She would build hers out of freedom. She whispered into the quiet room, "I forgive you," and felt the words settle deep inside her chest. The tears that came weren't bitter. They were cleansing. Ethan appeared in the doorway again, sleepy and barefoot. "You're still up," he murmured. "Just finishing something," she said, smiling faintly. He came closer, wrapping her in a hug from behind. "You're allowed to rest, you know." "I know," she whispered, leaning into him. "I think I finally can." Outside, the city shimmered under the night sky. The moonlight rippled across the ocean in long, trembling bands of silver. For the first time in her life, Clara didn't feel like she was waiting for her family to love her right. She had stopped waiting altogether. She reached for Ethan's hand and said quietly, "I think I'm ready to stop remembering just to hurt." He kissed the top of her head. "Then remember to heal." She smiled against his chest, breathing in the scent of home. And in the stillness of that moment, the past finally loosened its grip. It started with a headline. Clara was in her office going over blueprints for a new public park project when her assistant burst through the door holding a tablet. "You should see this," she said breathlessly. Clara frowned, wiping graphite dust from her fingertips. "What is it?" Her assistant hesitated before handing her the screen. The headline was impossible to miss. "Golden Girl Falls from Grace Lily Henderson Walks Off Stage Mid-Performance." Beneath it, a still image froze her sister's face in mid-sneer, her mouth open in fury, the microphone slipping from her hand. The caption read, "Pianist storms out after berating orchestra live on national broadcast." For a long moment, Clara just stared. The photo didn't look real. Lily, perfect Lily, golden-haired and perpetually adored, was trending for all the wrong reasons. The hashtags told the story: number, Golden Girl no more, number, stage meltdown, number, Henderson drama. Ethan walked in just then, loosening his tie, the faintest smile playing on his lips. So the universe finally found its balance. Clara shot him a look, half amused, half shocked. "Don't say that." He shrugged, leaning against the doorframe. "Karma doesn't need an invitation. It just arrives on time." She wanted to disagree, to tell him that it wasn't right to take pleasure in someone else's downfall, but deep inside, a part of her trembled with the quiet satisfaction of poetic justice. By evening, the story had exploded. Every major network replayed the clip of Lily throwing her microphone and storming off stage during a televised performance. The orchestra's conductor looked stunned, the audience gasped audibly, and the video looped endlessly across social media. Commentators called it a career-ending tantrum. Someone posted a compilation of Lily's previous interviews, piecing together her arrogant remarks about lesser musicians and standards of class. The internet feasted. For once, Clara didn't check her family group chat. She knew exactly what would be waiting there. Chaos, denial, blame. That night, Ethan found her on the couch watching the clip again in silence. The sound was off, but she could still see the rage in her sister's eyes, the same look Lily used to give her whenever she dared to shine too brightly. "You don't have to watch it," Ethan said, sitting beside her. Clara's gaze stayed fixed on the screen. "I know. I never thought she'd self-destruct." Ethan's voice softened. "She's been building toward this for years. Perfection is exhausting, especially when it's a lie." Clara looked at him, a faint sadness crossing her face. "Do you think she ever hated me? Or was it just habit?" He reached for her hand. "Maybe she hated how free you were, even when you didn't feel it." The words lingered long after the television went dark. 2 days later, the doorbell rang. Clara opened it to find a courier holding an envelope addressed to Mrs. Clara Caldwell. Inside was an invitation to appear on a popular talk show, one that had already covered her wedding story months earlier. They wanted her to speak, to share her side of the Henderson family dynamic. The offer came with an absurd sum of money. She set the envelope down on the table and stared at it for a long moment. Maya called later that night, her voice buzzing with energy. "You have to do it," she said. "They humiliated you publicly. This is your turn." Clara twirled a pen between her fingers, thoughtful. "It's tempting." "It's justice," Maya insisted. "You'd own the narrative." Clara's tone was calm. "Or I'd just feed it, and I think it's had enough of me." Maya sighed, disappointed. "You're too classy for your own good." Clara smiled. "No, I'm just tired of performing pain for other people's entertainment." When she hung up, she turned to Ethan, who had been quietly listening. He met her eyes and said simply, "That's the answer right there." But the universe wasn't done testing her. The next evening, as Clara was watering the plants on their balcony, her phone rang. Unknown number. She almost ignored it. Then something in her chest stirred, an old familiar instinct. She answered. Clara, the voice on the other end, was trembling unmistakably familiar. It's me, Lily. For a second, the sound didn't register. Clara's grip on the watering can loosened slightly. Lily, please don't hang up, her sister said quickly. I didn't know who else to call. Clara leaned against the railing, eyes narrowing. You have plenty of people. Or you did. A shaky breath. Not anymore. Silence stretched between them, heavy with years of unspoken things. I saw your performance, Clara said finally, her voice steady. I lost everything, Lily whispered. Sponsors, contracts. They all dropped me. The press won't stop. They've turned me into a villain. Clara almost laughed at the irony. That's what happens when the mask breaks. Don't do that, Lily said, her voice cracking. Don't talk to me like them. I made mistakes, okay, I was jealous, Clara. You had everything, love, peace, the life I thought I was supposed to have. The confession caught her off guard. She didn't answer right away. Lily continued, her words tumbling over each other. You think it was easy being their favorite. Every note I played, every show I did, it wasn't for me. It was for Dad's pride, Mom's perfection. You rebelled and I followed orders. But we both ended up broken. Clara closed her eyes. You could have stopped hurting me. I know, Lily whispered. And I'm sorry. The two words hung in the air, fragile as glass. When Clara finally spoke, her voice was soft but firm. We can't fix the past, but maybe you can stop running from it. On the other end, Lily sniffled. I don't know how. Start by sitting with it, Clara said quietly. That's how I did. Lily exhaled shakily. Thank you. Even if you don't mean it. I mean it, Clara said. But forgiveness doesn't mean we go back. She hung up gently before her resolve could waver. That night, Ethan found her staring at the city lights again. Was that your sister? He asked. Yes. Do you regret answering? Clara shook her head. No, I just didn't expect her to sound so human. He smiled faintly. Maybe that's her punishment. Clara looked down at her wedding ring, tracing the gold band with her thumb. For years I wanted them to see me suffer. Now I just want them to see me at peace. The following week, her inbox flooded again, this time with speaking invitations, sponsorships, features in women's magazines. People called her a voice of grace in a world of scandal. One headline even read, From Shadow to Spotlight, How Clara Caldwell Redefined Resilience. She accepted one invitation to deliver a keynote speech at a design conference in Austin. The topic, Building Beyond Survival. When she stepped onto that stage, the audience of hundreds rose to their feet. She smiled, poised and calm beneath the lights. Sometimes she began, we spend our whole lives trying to earn love from people too broken to give it. But love isn't something you win. It's something you create brick by brick, truth by truth. Applause thundered. Somewhere she hoped her sister was watching. Not to feel envy, but to see what freedom looked like. After the event, Clara walked outside into the Texas sunlight. The warmth hit her face and she tilted her head toward it, eyes closed. Ethan came up beside her, sliding his hand into hers. You don't feel sorry for her? He asked gently. Clara shook her head. No, I feel released. She turned toward him, her smile serene and certain. For years I thought revenge would taste like victory, but it tastes like peace. Ethan kissed her temple, the quiet pride in his touch, saying more than words ever could. The past had finally stopped chasing her, but peace, she knew, was never permanent. Somewhere deep inside she could feel the faint stirring of another secret, something waiting just beyond the calm. And as the sun dipped low, painting the sky in molten gold, Clara whispered to herself, If the past calls again, I'll be ready to answer, but on my terms this time. The letter arrived on a gray morning in late October, tucked neatly between bills and advertisements. Clara almost missed it at first. It was the handwriting that stopped her, the slanted cursive she hadn't seen in over a decade. Elaine Henderson. Her breath caught. For a moment she just stared at it, her coffee cooling in her hands. The envelope was cream-colored edges, slightly bent her name, written carefully across the center, Mrs. Clara Caldwell. Not Clara, not my daughter, but formal, polite, hesitant. Ethan came into the kitchen, still half asleep, tie loose around his neck. You look like you've seen a ghost. In a way, I have. She held up the envelope. It's from my mother. He blinked, the sleep fading from his eyes. Do you want to open it? Clara hesitated. I don't know. Ethan poured himself coffee and set the mug beside her. Then wait until you do. But she couldn't wait. Her fingers were already trembling as she slid a knife under the seal. Inside was a single sheet of thick paper folded twice. Her mother's perfume lingered faintly on the paper, soft, floral, almost nostalgic. Clara unfolded it, her heart pounding as she began to read. My dearest Clara, if this reaches you, it means I've finally found the courage I lacked when you needed it most. Her throat tightened. She read on. I watched your wedding on television. I wasn't supposed to, but I did. Your father was furious, of course, but I couldn't look away. I saw you standing there in that white gown alone, and for the first time I realized how much of you I never truly saw. You were radiant. You were strong. And you were everything I once wanted to be but didn't know how. Clara pressed the paper against her knee, her chest aching. She could almost hear her mother's voice, measured, composed, always careful not to break. Your strength humbled me. Your silence shamed me. I should have protected you, but I didn't. And I won't ask for your forgiveness, because I don't deserve it. I just need you to know that my silence wasn't hate. It was fear. She stopped reading for a moment, blinking back tears. Ethan sat quietly across from her, watching her face. Do you want me to? No, she whispered. I have to finish this. I was raised to believe appearances were everything, that love meant perfection, not truth. I thought protecting our image would protect our family. I was wrong. I lost you to my fear, and I lost myself to your father's pride. Clara's eyes burned. She turned the page over. Your father loved you in his way, but he didn't know how to love without control. He saw himself in you, the parts of him he hated most. Your independence frightened him, your success made him feel small. And when you stopped needing him, he mistook it for rejection. Tears spilled freely now. She didn't wipe them away. I watched him take your grandmother's trust money after she passed. He told me it was for the family business, but I knew it was meant for you. I said nothing. That silence has haunted me every day since. Clara's breath hitched. He took. She looked up at Ethan. He took what was mine. Ethan frowned, his expression darkening. What money? Clara shook her head, voice cracking. My grandmother had a fund for me. I thought it never existed. Dad told me it was just a rumor. She looked back at the page. I can't undo what we did. But if you ever decide to look, the truth is in the family files, the blue folder in your father's study. I kept copies there even when he told me to burn them. Maybe part of me hoped you'd find them one day. Her hand trembled as she read the last lines. If forgiveness is too much, I'll settle for peace. Just know that I am proud of you, quietly, finally, completely. The letter ended there, unsigned, as if her mother didn't quite know how to close it. Clara folded it slowly, her hands steady now, though her chest felt hollow. She sat back in her chair, staring out the window at the slow drizzle coating the glass. Ethan broke the silence. Do you believe her? Clara thought for a long time. I think I have to. He reached across the table and took her hand. What will you do? I'm not sure yet. She rose from her chair and walked to the window, tracing a finger through the condensation on the glass. Outside, the city looked muted, soft. The letter's weight in her hand felt both unbearable and necessary. Later that afternoon, she sat alone in her studio, the letter open beside her. She read it again and again until the words stopped stinging. Somewhere between the lines of guilt and apology, she recognized something unexpected: truth. It wasn't redemption, not yet. But it was real. For the first time, she saw her mother not as a villain, but as a woman, one trapped by the same perfection she had forced on everyone else. When Ethan came in with dinner, Clara was still staring at the paper. "Do you want me to file it away?" he asked gently. She shook her head. "No. I want to keep it where I can see it. I think I need to remember what running from yourself looks like." They ate quietly. When the plates were cleared, Ethan asked, "Will you write her back?" Clara considered it, then stood and went to her desk. She pulled out a sheet of paper and uncapped her pen. For several minutes she wrote nothing, just stared at the blank page. Then slowly she began, "Mom, I don't know what to say. Maybe that's because there's nothing left to explain. I spent years trying to understand your silence, and now I realize it wasn't about me. You were surviving in your own way. I forgive you, but from afar." She stopped, folded the note, and slipped it into an envelope. She didn't address it. She didn't even seal it. She just tucked it into her journal and whispered, "That's enough." The next morning, Clara drove to the old Henderson estate. The gates were locked now, the house dark and unkept, but she parked at the edge of the property and stepped out. The air smelled of salt and dust, the remnants of privilege long gone. She stood at the gate for a long time, clutching her mother's letter. "I forgive you," she said softly, "but I won't forget what it cost." She left the letter in the mailbox and turned back toward her car. That night she wrote in her journal again, "Forgiveness isn't a gift for them, it's freedom for me." When she finished, she closed the book and felt something inside her shift. Not relief exactly, but release. Ethan came over and sat beside her, wrapping his arm around her shoulders. "You look lighter," he murmured. "I think I am," she said. "It's strange, though. I expected forgiveness to feel like victory. It feels more like quiet." "Quiet can be good," he said softly. "Quiet means you've stopped fighting ghosts." She smiled faintly. "Then maybe I'm finally done haunting myself." They sat there in the stillness, the lamp casting a warm glow across the room. Before bed, Clara placed the unopened envelope she had written to her mother into her desk drawer. She didn't need to send it. Forgiveness didn't have to travel to be real. Outside, rain began to fall again, tapping gently against the windows. She whispered to herself, "Maybe this is what peace really looks like, quiet, undeserved, but mine." Ethan appeared in the doorway, smiling softly. "Then keep it," he said. "Don't let them take it again." Clara nodded her hand, brushing the edge of the desk where her mother's letter rested. "I won't." And for the first time in her life, she believed it. The call came on an ordinary Thursday morning, while Clara was sketching a concept for a new community project. The phone buzzed against the table, flashing an unknown number. She almost ignored it. Most unexpected calls lately were journalists still fishing for a headline. But something made her pick up. "Clara," the voice rasped on the other end, trembling, breathless. "It's your mother." Clara froze, pencil midair. "Mom, it's your father," Elaine said, her voice cracking. It's all over the news. Something's happened." Clara's stomach dropped. "What do you mean?" There was a pause, heavy with guilt. "He's lost everything." An hour later, the story was everywhere. Henderson Construction, under federal investigation for fraud and corruption. Headlines screamed across every major outlet. Pictures of Richard Henderson, once the symbol of prestige and old money poise, now showed a man hunched and exhausted, surrounded by reporters as he exited the courthouse. His hair disheveled, his jaw clenched, his eyes hollow. Clara sat in her office, the newspaper spread open in front of her, her coffee untouched. The irony wasn't lost on her. The man who had built his life around control, status, and image had finally been stripped of all three. Ethan entered quietly, holding another paper. "It's bad," he said simply. "They're saying he falsified contracts, paid off city inspectors, used shell companies." Clara's voice was even. "And stole money meant for me." Ethan nodded slowly. "That too." She turned toward the window, her reflection ghost-like against the glass. Below, San Diego's skyline glittered in the distance, indifferent to one man's ruin. "He spent his life teaching me that shame was the worst thing you could feel," she murmured. I wonder how it feels to finally wear it. That evening, her mother called again. Clara let it ring 3 times before answering. Clara Elaine whispered, her voice raw. He won't speak to anyone, he just sits in his study. I don't know what to do. Clara said nothing. Please, her mother begged. He asked for you. Clara closed her eyes. You think I should help him now? I think you need to see him, Elaine said softly. If not for him, then for yourself. For a long moment, neither of them spoke. Then Clara exhaled slowly. Text me the address. The next morning, she drove to the Henderson estate for the first time in years. The once grand house looked smaller, now almost frail, its manicured hedges overgrown, the fountain out front dry. The gate creaked when she pushed it open. She stepped into the foyer. The air smelled of dust and old paper. The portraits on the wall, Richard shaking hands with politicians, Elaine smiling beside him, Lily holding a bouquet of awards, were all slightly crooked, as though the house itself had lost balance. Her mother met her in the hall, eyes, red-rimmed hair unpinned. He's in his office, she said quietly. He hasn't eaten. Clara nodded and walked toward the heavy wooden door at the end of the corridor. She paused before opening it, steadying herself. Inside, Richard sat at his desk, head bowed over scattered papers. The once imposing man looked small now, his suit wrinkled, his hands trembling as he flipped through documents that no longer mattered. He looked up when she entered. Clara. She didn't move closer. Dad. For a long time, they simply stared at each other. The silence between them was louder than any accusation. You came, he said, at last, his voice hoarse. I did, she replied evenly. He gestured weakly to the chair opposite his desk. Sit. She didn't. I prefer to stand. Richard's eyes fell to the papers in front of him, legal notices, foreclosure documents, letters from attorneys. They're taking everything, he muttered. The house, the company, the cars. 40 years of work gone. 40 years of lies, Clara corrected softly. He looked up sharply. You think this is easy for me? No, she said. But it was easy for you to humiliate me, wasn't it? To call my wedding a disgrace, to steal from your own daughter because you couldn't stand her independence. Richard's face contorted, his jaw tightening. You don't understand. No, she cut in. I understand perfectly. You built everything to look powerful because you've always been terrified of being small. You didn't just take money from me, you took my belief that love could ever exist without conditions. He sank back in his chair, the fight draining from his posture. You sound just like her, he muttered. Who? Your grandmother. Clara hesitated. What do you mean? He stared at the window, eyes distant. She told me once that power isn't worth anything if it costs you your peace. I laughed at her, said peace doesn't buy houses. He gave a bitter laugh. She was right, you know. Peace doesn't buy houses, but losing peace can destroy them. The words hung between them, heavy with irony. Finally, Clara stepped closer, her voice steady. You used her money to build your empire, and now it's gone. Maybe that's justice. Richard looked up at her, his eyes glistening. You think this is justice? Watching everything I worked for burn? Yes, Clara said simply. Because maybe now you'll finally understand what humility feels like. He lowered his head into his hands. I was trying to make something of this family. No, she said softly. You were trying to make something of yourself, and you used all of us to do it. Tears slipped down his face, silent and unacknowledged. For a man who had always treated emotion like weakness, they looked foreign there. I don't expect forgiveness, he whispered. I just didn't want to die with you hating me. Clara watched him for a moment, then said quietly, I don't hate you, Dad. I just don't owe you love anymore. She turned toward the door. He called after her, his voice desperate now. Clara, please, help me fix this. You have connections. Your husband. She stopped, hand on the doorknob. You still think everything can be fixed by someone else's power. Then she looked back at him one last time. You built a life out of control and fear. I'm building one out of truth. That's the difference between us. And she walked out. Outside, Elaine stood in the hallway, wringing her hands. "How was he?" she asked quietly. Clara's expression softened for the briefest second. "Human," she said. Finally. When she left the house, reporters were camped outside the gate. Cameras flashed as she stepped into the sunlight. One shouted, "Mrs. Caldwell, any comment on your father's arrest?" Clara paused just long enough to answer. "Sometimes the truth costs everything," she said calmly, "but it's still worth the price." By that evening, the story was everywhere. Again, pictures of Richard Henderson's fall from grace, juxtaposed with images of Clara at her design conference, speaking about ethics and transparency in business. The contrast was too poetic for the media to ignore. That night, Clara sat on her balcony, a glass of wine in her hand, the sea breeze soft against her skin. Ethan joined her, setting his phone aside. "He pleaded guilty," he said quietly. "No trial." Clara nodded, staring into the dark water below. "Then it's over." "Are you okay?" She smiled faintly. "Better than I thought I'd be." Ethan brushed a strand of hair from her face. "You don't have to carry their story anymore." "I won't," she said. "He taught me shame. Life taught me grace. Somewhere between the two, I found myself." He reached for her hand, their fingers intertwining. "Is it over for you, then?" "For him, yes," she said, her gaze steady on the horizon. "For me, it's just beginning." The night deepened, quiet and clean. For once, Clara didn't feel like the daughter of Richard Henderson or the sister of Lily. She was simply herself, no longer haunted by what she had survived, but defined by what she had become. And as the tide rolled in, washing away the footprints on the sand below, she knew the past could no longer reach her. Not here, not anymore. The night of the gala arrived with a brilliance that seemed to pulse through the city. San Diego's skyline shimmered against the black sea, each tower glowing like a monument to possibility. Outside the Grand Meridian Hotel, a line of sleek cars idled beneath the awning, cameras flashing as guests in designer gowns and tailored tuxedos stepped onto the crimson carpet. Clara stood inside the lobby, her hand resting lightly on Ethan's arm. She wore an emerald green gown that swept the floor, the fabric soft but commanding. Reporters were already whispering her name as they streamed in. Clara Caldwell, architect of the Harborlight Renewal Project, the woman whose vision had reshaped a city district and revived a dying waterfront. Tonight she was being honored as one of the top innovators of the year. "Are you ready?" Ethan murmured, adjusting the small pin on his lapel. Clara smiled faintly. "As ready as I'll ever be." He leaned close enough that only she could hear him. "You look like you own the place." "Maybe I finally do," she said softly. When they entered the ballroom, a hush swept over the crowd. Crystal chandeliers sparkled overhead, casting fractured light across gold-trimmed tables. Musicians played softly in the corner, violins threading through the hum of conversation. A massive banner hung above the stage, celebrating visionaries who build the future. Clara recognized faces from every corner of the city: politicians, investors, and journalists. Cameras clicked as she took her seat near the front. Halfway through the evening, as the MC's voice filled the room with practiced enthusiasm, Clara's gaze caught on something or someone at the far end of the hall. A figure standing near the entrance, understated in a dark navy dress, her blonde hair pulled into a neat chignon. Her breath faltered. It was Lily. She looked thinner than Clara remembered her once radiant glow, dulled by fatigue. But her posture was straight, her chin lifted with familiar pride. She wasn't accompanied by anyone, just a clutch bag in her hand and a faint tremor in her eyes. Ethan followed Clara's gaze. "Do you want me to ask her to leave?" Clara shook her head. "No, let her stay." The MC's voice rose again. "And now please welcome our final honoree of the evening, the woman whose work has transformed our city's landscape and whose integrity reminds us all that true legacy is built from the ground up. Ladies and gentlemen, Clara Caldwell." Applause rippled across the room. Cameras flashed. Clara took a slow breath and rose to her feet, her heart pounding not from nerves, but from the surreal awareness that this moment was entirely hers. She walked to the stage, the train of her gown whispering across the polished floor. The spotlight caught her face as she reached the podium. "Good evening," she began, her voice steady. "A few years ago, I thought success was measured by recognition, by applause, by approval, by the people who finally decided you were worth seeing. But I learned something different. The real work, the real art happens when no one is watching, when you keep building, even after the world tells you you're not enough." The audience listened motionless. She continued, "Tonight I stand here not because of what I've built, but because I stopped letting others define what I could be. My story isn't about achievement, it's about freedom. About the moment you realize you don't have to earn your worth from people who refuse to give it." Her eyes swept the crowd, landing briefly, deliberately on Lily. Their gazes met for a fleeting second, and Clara saw something unexpected there. Not envy, not defiance, just quiet recognition. When she finished her speech, the room erupted in applause. Standing ovations filled the ballroom, the sound thunderous and cleansing. Clara smiled, but it wasn't the smile of triumph. It was calm, unshaken peace. Afterward, guests crowded around her, shaking her hand, offering praise, snapping photos. She accepted each compliment with grace, though her eyes kept drifting toward the edge of the room where Lily stood alone, half in shadow. Finally, as the music swelled and the crowd thinned toward the dance floor, Clara excused herself and walked toward her sister. Lily straightened as she approached, clutching her purse tighter. "You were incredible," she said, her voice small. "Thank you," Clara replied. "I didn't expect to see you here." Lily's lips curved in a brittle smile. "I almost didn't come, but I saw your name in the papers and I needed to see it for myself." Clara's tone was gentle but direct. "To see me succeed. To see if I could face what I lost," Lily admitted quietly. "You were right, Clara. I was jealous. I thought love was something you earned by being perfect. And when you stopped chasing it, I didn't understand how you could still be whole." Clara studied her sister's face. For the first time, she didn't see the performer, the favorite, or the rival, just a woman who looked tired of pretending. "You don't have to keep punishing yourself," Clara said softly. "It's over." Lily's eyes filled with tears. "Maybe for you, but for me it's just beginning. I can't even walk into a theater without whispers following me." "Then stop walking where they expect you to," Clara said simply. "Start over somewhere else. Do something that belongs only to you." Lily let out a shaky laugh. "You make it sound easy." "It's not," Clara said. "But it's worth it." They stood in silence for a while, the music fading behind them. Finally, Lily reached into her bag and pulled out a small folded envelope. "I wanted you to have this. I found it in Mom's things before the house was repossessed." Clara took it hesitantly. "What is it?" Lily's voice trembled. "A letter. From Dad." Her stomach tightened. "Why didn't you tell me sooner?" "Because I wasn't sure you'd want it," Lily whispered. "But after everything, I think you deserve to read his last words." Clara stared at the envelope, its edges yellowed, her father's bold handwriting unmistakable. She didn't open it, not yet. She just slipped it into her clutch and looked at Lily. "Thank you," she said. Her sister nodded, tears spilling freely now. "I'm sorry, Clara. For everything." Clara reached out, brushing a tear from her sister's cheek. "I know." When she turned back toward Ethan, he was watching them quietly, pride softening his expression. She walked back to him, the envelope still warm in her hand. "Are you going to read it?" he asked. "Not tonight," she said. "Tonight is for the living." As the orchestra began to play, Ethan held out his hand. "Then dance with me, Mrs. Caldwell." She smiled and took it. Together they moved across the floor, the crowd parting around them. The chandelier light reflected off the emerald silk of her gown, painting golden arcs across the polished floor. Somewhere in the crowd, Lily stood watching, her expression unreadable. But when their eyes met one last time, she smiled, not with envy, but with quiet relief. Later that night, after the gala ended, and the hotel hallways grew silent, Clara stood by her window, the city lights stretching endlessly before her. The letter lay unopened on the table. She traced her father's name with one finger, then turned away. She would read it when she was ready. for now she had something more precious than closure peace. Outside, a soft wind swept through the streets, carrying the echo of applause. Clara closed her eyes and let it wash over her. She didn't need validation, not from the world, not from her family, not even from the man whose signature marked the envelope. She already had everything she needed: freedom. And as the night deepened around her, she whispered to herself, "This time the story ends on my terms." The next morning, Clara sat by the window of her office, the unopened envelope from her father resting on the desk before her. Sunlight streamed through the glass, washing over the letter, as if daring her to face it. For hours she had gone back and forth. Open it, leave it, forget it, remember. Every time she reached for it, something inside her hesitated. When Ethan entered, she didn't look up. "It's been sitting there since last night," he said softly. "I know." He came closer, resting his hand gently on her shoulder. "You don't owe the past anything you know." Not even a glance. Clara exhaled, her fingers brushing over the rough edge of the envelope. "I'm not sure it's about owing anymore. Maybe I just need to know what he left behind." Ethan nodded, then kissed her temple. "Then read it, but only if you're ready." She opened it carefully, the seal brittle with age. Inside was a single sheet of paper, her father's handwriting bold and deliberate, as if he had forced himself to hold steady. She drew in a deep breath and began. "My daughter, if you're reading this, then everything has already come undone. The house, the company, my pride, all of it gone. Maybe that's the price for a lifetime of silence. I used to believe strength meant never admitting fear. I thought control was the same as love. I was wrong." Her throat tightened. She continued. "You once asked me when you were 10 why I never said I was proud of you. I told you that pride was earned, not given. But the truth is, I didn't say it because I was jealous. You had courage. I never did the courage to live without approval. I didn't know how to love that. I only knew how to control what I couldn't understand." She paused, tears pricking her eyes. "I built my empire on fear, and it crumbled for the same reason. You were the only part of my life that was ever truly solid, but I was too blind to see it. I hope you never make the mistake of mistaking silence for strength or pride for love. You've already surpassed me, and for that I am proud. Even if I never said it, I was proud." The words blurred as tears slipped down her cheeks. She could almost hear his voice, not the harsh, commanding one she had grown up with, but something softer, something human. She read the final lines. "Take what's left of my legacy and make it honest. Build something I never could name that means integrity instead of fear. You were always meant to outgrow me, and I am sorry that I made that so hard." There was no signature, only a faint smear where the ink had bled from what might have been a tear. Clara folded the letter carefully and sat still for a long time, her heartbeat slowing, her breathing even. When she finally looked up, Ethan was watching her from across the room. "Well?" he asked gently. She smiled faintly through her tears. "It wasn't an apology, not really. But it was enough," Ethan nodded. "Maybe that's all it ever needed to be." That afternoon, Clara drove to the waterfront, the same site where her latest project had begun, the same stretch of land her father had once tried to buy and bulldoze. The wind was cool against her skin, the ocean restless with motion. The Harborlight district gleamed in the sunlight. Now the hotel, the community center, the promenade filled with people. She had built it from the ruins of his empire, but without his deceit. As she stood overlooking the water, a familiar voice spoke behind her. "It's beautiful." Clara turned to see her mother. Elaine stood at the edge of the walkway, a scarf tied around her neck, her expression tentative but warm. "I didn't expect to see you here," Clara said softly. Elaine smiled faintly. "I wasn't sure I should come, but I wanted to see what you built." Clara nodded toward the skyline. "It's cleaner than his version." Elaine's gaze followed hers. "He would have been proud, not because of the success, but because you made it honest." Clara studied her mother for a moment, then asked quietly, "Did you know he left me a letter?" Elaine hesitated, then nodded. He wrote it before the sentencing. He wanted me to send it, but I couldn't. I was afraid it would reopen old wounds. It didn't, Clara said. It closed them. They stood in silence for a moment, the ocean's rhythm filling the space between them. Elaine turned to her. He was a difficult man to love, but he loved you, Clara. He just didn't know how to show it. Clara's voice softened. Neither did you. Elaine flinched, but she didn't look away. You're right, I failed you both. But I've spent every day since trying to unlearn the kind of woman I was taught to be. Clara studied her, the fine lines on her face deepened by wind and remorse. For the first time, she didn't see her as an adversary. She saw her as someone finally brave enough to face her own reflection. Maybe we both had to start over, Clara said. Elaine smiled through her tears. You did more than start over. You created something I never thought possible, a life not defined by anyone's expectations. They sat together on a nearby bench, watching children run along the pier, their laughter carried by the wind. I still remember your wedding day, Elaine said quietly. I was on that yacht pretending to enjoy the champagne while watching the sunset. But all I could think about was you walking down that aisle alone. I told myself I had no choice, that it was your father's decision. But the truth is, I chose silence. I chose comfort over courage. I'll regret that for the rest of my life. Clara's hand tightened around the edge of the bench. I forgave you a long time ago. I just didn't know it until now. Elaine looked at her, eyes shining. Then maybe there's still time for us. Maybe, Clara said softly. But whatever comes next, it has to be real. I understand, Elaine whispered. They sat there until the sun dipped low on the horizon, casting gold across the water. It felt like an ending, but also a beginning. Later that evening, back in her apartment, Clara placed her father's letter into a frame, not as a memorial but as a reminder. Beneath it, she slipped a small note of her own. Peace is not inherited, it's built. She set it on her desk, beside the sketches of her next project, a public housing initiative designed for women rebuilding their lives after hardship. Ethan leaned over her shoulder, studying the designs. This one's different, he said. Clara smiled. It's meant to be. He kissed her cheek. What will you call it? She thought for a moment, her eyes drifting toward the framed letter. The Henderson Renewal Center. Ethan raised an eyebrow. You're keeping the name. Yes, she said firmly. But I'm rewriting what it means. When the news broke a month later about her new initiative, the press praised it as her most personal project yet. They called it a daughter's redemption, but Clara didn't see it that way. It wasn't redemption, it was evolution. One morning, while reviewing construction plans, she received a message from Lily. A photo. It showed a piano on a small stage, the sign above it reading, "The Clara and Lily Scholarship Recital." Beneath it, her sister had written, "We're building again too." Clara smiled, her chest swelling with quiet pride. The cycle was ending. The bitterness that had once defined their family was finally dissolving into something gentler. That night, she stood by the window, the city glowing beneath her like a living mosaic. Ethan came up behind her, wrapping his arms around her waist. "Do you ever think about the past?" he asked. "Sometimes," she said, "but only to remind myself how far I've come." He pressed his chin against her shoulder. "You turned disgrace into legacy," she smiled faintly. "No, I just stopped letting shame tell my story." They stood there in silence, the hum of the city below echoing like a heartbeat. And for the first time, Clara realized she wasn't living in reaction to her past anymore. She was living in creation of her future. A year later, the world outside Clara's window glowed with morning light. The ocean stretched beyond the glass, calm and endless, reflecting a sky streaked with gold. In her new office, everything felt alive. The hum of construction from the renewal center below, the laughter of children from the courtyard, the soft rustle of wind through open doors. The Harborlight project had become more than architecture. It had become a living testament to what she had built from the ruins of her past. Her assistant entered quietly, holding a thick report. These are the annual results for the renewal center, Mrs. Caldwell. You should see this. Clara smiled, flipping through the pages. The numbers told a story no scandal or humiliation could erase. Hundreds of families, housed dozens of new businesses, opened women rebuilding their lives in spaces she designed. Integrity is the architecture of the soul. The brass plaque on her wall read a quote she had chosen herself. For years she had built for validation, now she built for meaning. The phone buzzed with a message. A photo appeared: Lily at a piano surrounded by children. Beneath it was a note. The scholarship concert was a success. I finally feel like I'm home. Clara's chest tightened, but not from pain. The feeling was gentler, lighter. She placed the phone beside a framed letter, the one from her father. The ink faded but unforgotten. Behind it, tucked neatly, was a short note from her mother. We're learning from the woman who taught us how to rebuild. She smiled, whispering softly to herself. We're all learning. Later that afternoon, she sat across from a reporter at a cafe overlooking the ocean. The young woman had a recorder on the table and a notebook in hand, her excitement barely contained. You've become something of a symbol, she said. After everything your family went through, after what happened publicly. How did you move forward? Clara took a sip of her coffee, her expression calm. I stopped trying to win a war that didn't exist. Success isn't revenge, it's peace. I didn't move on to prove anyone wrong. I moved on to remember who I was before they told me otherwise. The reporter leaned forward. And now that you're being honored again next month, how does it feel to be celebrated by the same city that once doubted you? Clara's eyes drifted toward the water. It feels like forgiveness, she said. But not theirs. Mine. When the article went live 2 days later, it went viral. The headline read, "The Woman Who Turned Disgrace into Grace." Clips from the interview were shared across social media, her voice calm, poised, carrying the quiet conviction of someone who no longer needed to shout to be heard. Even strangers began to quote her words. Success isn't applause, it's peace. That evening, she and Ethan walked along the pier, their footsteps echoing against the boards. The sunset painted the sky in deep shades of amber and rose the same place they had stood the night she'd thrown her father's ring into the sea. Ethan's hand found hers. A year ago, you stood here and said you were done being haunted by the past. Do you still believe that? She nodded, her eyes fixed on the horizon. I think I do. The ghosts are still there, they just don't scare me anymore. He smiled. You could have destroyed them, you know. You could have burned it all down. Clara's lips curved faintly. I thought about it. But destruction would have made me them. Building something better made me free. She turned to face him, the wind lifting strands of her hair. Revenge doesn't always need fire. Sometimes it just needs light. The next morning, Clara visited the Henderson Renewal Center. The walls were painted in soft shades of cream and blue, the hallways lined with photographs of the first families who had moved in. She paused outside one of the classrooms where a young girl sat sketching on a piece of paper. The girl looked up shyly as Clara entered. Hi, the girl said. Are you the lady who built this place? Clara smiled and knelt beside her. I am. What are you drawing? A house, the girl said proudly. It's where I want to live when I grow up. Clara studied the picture, a house full of light surrounded by trees and laughter. It's beautiful, she said. The girl looked at her curiously. I want to be like you someday. Clara's heart swelled with quiet warmth. Don't be like me, she said gently. Be more. The girl grinned, and in that moment, Clara saw herself years ago, small, invisible, waiting for someone to notice. And now here she was, being that someone for another child. As she walked out of the center, she passed a wall covered in engraved names, donors, builders, architects. At the bottom, a new plaque had been added, in honor of Evelyn and Richard Henderson, who taught us that legacy is not perfection, it's transformation. She stopped and ran her fingers over the words. For the first time, she felt no bitterness, no grief, only peace. That night, Clara returned home and stood on the balcony watching the city lights shimmer across the bay. The sound of laughter from the renewal center drifted faintly through the evening air. She thought of her father's final letter, her mother's quiet strength, her sister's redemption. Somehow, in letting them go, she had set them all free. Ethan came up behind her, wrapping his arms around her waist. "You look peaceful," he murmured. "I am," she said softly. "For the first time, I think I finally am." He kissed her temple. "What's next for you?" Clara looked out over the water. "Building. Always building. But this time not to prove anything, to give back what I've found." They stood in silence, the night settling gently around them. Clara thought of everything that had led her here, the humiliation, the empty chapel, the flashing cameras, the laughter on that yacht. Once those memories had defined her story, now they were just pages she had already turned. Her voice when it came was quiet but certain. "You know," she said, "my parents called my wedding a disgrace. And maybe it was. But it was the kind of disgrace that became a doorway. Without it, I'd still be waiting for their approval. Now I don't need it." Ethan smiled. "And what do you need now?" She turned toward him, her eyes soft with light. "Nothing. Because peace doesn't need an audience." The next morning the ocean was calm again, and the renewal center buzzed with life. A new banner hung above the entrance, "The future we build begins here." Clara stood watching as volunteers arrived, her heart steady, her voice inside her finally quiet. Sometimes she thought the greatest revenge isn't in what the world sees, it's in what it can never take away again. She looked up at the sky, the light catching her face, and whispered, "I'm free." And now, if you've followed Clara's journey through betrayal, silence, and redemption, you already know that freedom doesn't always come with noise. Sometimes it arrives quietly, when you finally stop chasing what was never yours to begin with. But what about you? What would you have done in her place? Would you have forgiven or walked away for good? Tell me what you think in the comments below. I read every one of them. If Clara's story touched you, if you've ever fought to reclaim your worth or your voice, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe for more stories like this one. Because sometimes the quietest victories are the ones that echo the longest.